The first night Greta Langley noticed Yates Wilson sitting on her porch was the same night her father refused yet another marriage proposal on her behalf. Spring had settled over Silvercreek, Colorado, bringing with it a flurry of hopeful suitors and her father's increasingly impatient lectures about security and propriety. It was 1875, and at 22, Greta was already considered dangerously close to spinsterhood in the small mining town. She had watched her childhood friends marry one by one, starting as young as 16. Now she stood alone, the last unmarried woman in her circle, with no prospects that interested her in the slightest. "You cannot keep rejecting every man who comes calling," her father, Harold Langley, had told her that evening after turning away the banker's son. "Your mother would have wanted to see you settled." Greta had said nothing, merely nodding as she always did when her mother was mentioned. Elizabeth Langley had died 5 years prior, taking with her the only true ally Greta had ever known. Without her mother's gentle influence, her father had become obsessed with seeing his daughter properly married. After her father retired to his room, Greta had stepped onto the porch for fresh air, surprised to find a figure sitting quietly in the shadows. "Who's there?" she had called, heart racing. The man stood slowly, removing his hat. "Apologies, Miss Langley, didn't mean to startle you." She recognized him immediately. Yates Wilson had moved to Silvercreek just 3 months prior, taking over as foreman at the Murphy cattle ranch outside town. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, he had caused quite a stir among the unmarried girls in town and even some married ones. "Mr. Wilson, what are you doing on my porch at this hour?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I was passing by. Thought I might rest a spell before heading back to the ranch." She didn't believe him for a second. The Langley house sat at the very edge of town, nowhere near the path to the Murphy ranch. But there was something in his expression, a quiet intensity, an unspoken question that made her curious rather than afraid. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose there's no harm in sitting." He had simply nodded, settling back onto the porch steps while she took her father's rocking chair. They sat in silence for nearly an hour before he stood, placed his hat back on his head and walked away without another word. She had expected that to be the end of it. A strange encounter, nothing more. But the next evening, just as dusk was settling over the valley, she spotted him again. Sitting in the same place, saying nothing, for 2 weeks, the pattern continued. Every night, Yates Wilson would appear on her porch just after sunset. Sometimes they exchanged a few pleasantries about the weather or town gossip. Most evenings, they simply sat in comfortable silence until he would stand, tip his hat, and disappear into the night. Every unmarried woman in town was whispering about the handsome ranch foreman, spinning fantasies about catching his eye, becoming Mrs. Wilson. Yet here he was, night after night, sitting on her porch and barely speaking. It was the most peculiar courtship, if that's what it was, that Silvercreek had ever seen. By the 3rd week, Greta found herself looking forward to his visits. There was something calming about his presence, something genuine that she couldn't quite name. Unlike the other men who came calling with rehearsed compliments and transparent ambitions for her father's mining investments, Yates seemed to want nothing from her at all. "People are talking," she told him one evening in late April as they watched fireflies dance along the edge of her father's property. "People always talk," he replied, whittling a small piece of pine with a pocket knife. His hands were calloused but moved with surprising delicacy. "They're saying you have intentions." He looked up then, his eyes meeting hers. "Do you want me to have intentions, Miss Langley?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. "I don't know you well enough to say." A slight smile crossed his face, the first she'd seen from him. "Fair enough," he returned to his whittling. "Might be I'm just enjoying the company." The following Sunday, Greta attended services at the small white church in the center of town. As always, she felt the weight of stares and whispers. The married women looked at her with pitying smiles, the unmarried girls with envy and speculation. Yates wasn't there, the ranch hands rarely attended, but his name was on everyone's lips. Violet Murphy, whose father owned the ranch where Yates worked, cornered Greta after the service. What's he like? She demanded, eyes bright with curiosity. When he speaks to you, he hardly speaks at all, Greta admitted. Violet looked disappointed. He never looks twice at any girl in town. Father says he's the best foreman they've ever had, but so reserved you'd think he was hiding something. The idea had occurred to Greta as well. What kind of man sits silently on a woman's porch night after night? Has your father mentioned anything about his past? Greta asked. Violet shook her head. Only that he came with excellent references from ranches in Wyoming. Father didn't ask, for more good cowboys are hard to come by these days. That evening, when Yates appeared at his usual time, Greta decided on a more direct approach. Where are you from, Mr. Wilson? She asked as soon as he settled onto the steps. If the question surprised him, he didn't show it. Born in Texas, moved around plenty since then. Wyoming most recently, I hear, he nodded, his expression giving away nothing. And what brought you to Silvercreek? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, needed a change. Heard Murphy was looking for a foreman. Is that all? His eyes met hers, and something in them made her breath catch. No, Miss Langley, that's not all. Before she could press further, the front door opened. Harold Langley stepped onto the porch, his expression darkening at the sight of Yates. Evening, Mr. Wilson, he said stiffly. Didn't realize we had company. Yates stood immediately, hat in hand. Mr. Langley. Just keeping your daughter company for a spell. I'll be on my way. Next time you might consider calling at a proper hour with proper intentions stated, Harold said. People are talking. Father, Greta began, but Yates cut her off. You're right, sir, my apologies. He turned to Greta. Good evening, Miss Langley. She watched him walk away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the road. Her father stood beside her, arms crossed. I don't want him here again unless he comes through the front door at a decent hour, Harold said firmly. Whatever game he's playing, I won't have your reputation tarnished. He's not playing any game, Greta protested. He's just sitting, talking sometimes. A man doesn't sit on a woman's porch every night without intentions, proper or otherwise. And if his intentions were proper, he'd have spoken to me by now. The next evening, Greta waited on the porch, half expecting Yates not to appear, but just as the last light faded from the sky, his familiar silhouette appeared on the road. He stopped short when he saw her, then approached slowly, remaining at the bottom of the porch steps. Your father made himself clear, he said. I shouldn't be here. Then why are you? He looked down at his boots. Couldn't stay away, I suppose. Something fluttered in Greta's chest. Why do you come here every night, Mr. Wilson? The truth, please. He was silent for a long moment. First night was an accident, was riding back from town, saw you sitting alone, reminded me of someone. Who? My sister. She used to sit on our porch in the evenings. It wasn't the answer she'd expected. Where is she now? Dead 5 years ago, influenza. The simple statement held such weight. I'm sorry, he shrugged slightly. Been a long time, and the other nights. Why did you come back? His eyes met hers. Because when I'm sitting here, things feel right. Can't explain it better than that. Before she could respond, they heard the front door opening. Yates quickly stepped back, melding with the shadows beyond the porch light. Greta turned to see her father. Who are you talking to? Harold demanded, peering into the darkness. Just myself, Greta lied. Thinking aloud, Harold frowned. Come inside, it's not proper for you to be out here alone. Greta followed him in, glancing back only once to see if Yates remained. The road was empty. The next day, Greta rode into town for supplies, her mind still occupied with Yates's words from the night before. She was so distracted that she nearly collided with a wagon outside the general store. Whoa there. The driver pulled his horses up short. Miss Langley, you ought to watch where you're going. She recognized Oliver Prescott, one of her rejected suitors, looking down at her with a mixture of concern and smugness. My apologies, Mr. Prescott. My mind was elsewhere. With your cowboy, no doubt, he said, his tone hardening. Whole town's talking about Wilson's nightly visits. Heat rose to Greta's cheeks. Mr. Wilson is a friend, nothing more, Oliver snorted. A man like that doesn't befriend a respectable woman without ulterior motives. You do well to remember that. As he drove away, Greta felt a flash of anger. The narrow-mindedness of Silvercreek sometimes felt suffocating. Perhaps that was why she found Yates's silent companionship so refreshing. He asked nothing of her, expected nothing. Inside the store, she found herself the object of curious stares and hushed conversations. Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, approached as Greta selected fabric for a new dress. "Your father must be beside himself," she said without preamble. "A respectable girl like you entertaining a man with no background, no family connections. Mr. Wilson works for the Murphy Ranch," Greta replied evenly. "That's respectable enough. A cowboy today, gone tomorrow," Mrs. Peterson clicked her tongue. "Not the kind of man a girl builds a future with. I wasn't aware I was building anything." "Well, something's being built, dear, whether you realize it or not. Your reputation, at the very least." Greta paid for her purchases and left, fuming at the presumptions of the townspeople. She had half a mind to tell Yates not to come anymore, to spare them both the gossip. But the thought of not seeing him brought an unexpected pang of sadness. That evening, her father announced they would be having dinner guests. "The Harrises are coming with their son Robert," he told her. "I expect you to be welcoming." Greta's heart sank. Robert Harris had been pursuing her for months, undeterred by multiple rejections. At 35, he was nearly as old as her father, with thinning hair and a perpetual expression of smug superiority. "Father, I've told you I have no interest in Mr. Harris." Harold's expression hardened. "You've had your time to find someone suitable on your own. Now you'll consider the match I've arranged." "Arranged?" Greta stood, anger rising. "You cannot arrange my marriage like I'm a piece of property." "I can and I will," Harold replied. "Robert has agreed to take over management of the mine when I retire. The match makes perfect sense." "For whom? Not for me. You'll thank me someday," her father said, his tone softening slightly. "Robert can provide for you, give you children, a secure future." "I want more than security. I want—" She trailed off, not entirely sure what she wanted, only that it wasn't a loveless marriage to Robert Harris. The dinner was as uncomfortable as Greta had feared. Robert monopolized the conversation, expounding on his business acumen and plans for the mine. Occasionally, he would direct a condescending smile at Greta, as if indulging a child. After dessert, Harold suggested Robert and Greta take some air on the porch. With no graceful way to refuse, she found herself standing awkwardly beside Robert in the very spot where she usually sat with Yates. "Your father tells me you've been entertaining a cowboy," Robert said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I trust that nonsense is finished now." "Mr. Wilson is a friend," she repeated, growing tired of defending herself. "No friend of mine would risk a lady's reputation." Robert stepped closer, taking her hand. "I've been patient, Greta. Your father and I have discussed terms. He's given his blessing." "Terms?" She pulled her hand away. "As if I'm a business transaction. Marriage is always a transaction of sorts. I offer stability, respectability." "What does your cowboy offer?" "Nights on a porch and town gossip." Before she could respond, she caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of the property. Yates stood in the shadows of an old oak tree, watching. Even at a distance, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. Robert followed her line of sight. "Is that him? The audacity?" He strode toward the steps, clearly intending to confront Yates, but by the time he reached the bottom of the porch, Yates had vanished into the darkness. "Skulking about like a thief," Robert muttered. "I should inform the sheriff." "Don't be ridiculous," Greta said sharply. "He's done nothing wrong." Robert turned to her, eyes narrowing. "Your father warned me you might be difficult. I had hoped to win you over gently, but perhaps you need more time to realize the seriousness of your situation." "My situation?" "An unmarried woman of your age has few options. I'm offering you the best one you're likely to get." His condescension ignited something in Greta, a fierce, sudden certainty that she would rather face any hardship than marry this man. "Mr. Harris, I appreciate your offer, but I must decline." "Now and forever." His face darkened. "We'll see what your father has to say about that." The next morning brought the confrontation Greta had been dreading. Harold was furious when Robert reported her rejection. "You willfully embarrassed me," he thundered over breakfast. "Robert is exactly the kind of man you need, established, respectable. He's arrogant and controlling," Greta replied. "I would rather live alone than with such a man." Alone, and how would you survive? On my charity forever. If necessary, I'll find work. Mrs. Sullivan needs help at the schoolhouse. Harold laughed bitterly. A teacher, my daughter, you know nothing of real work or hardship. Then perhaps it's time I learned. Their argument was interrupted by a knock at the door. Harold opened it to find Sheriff Thomas Wells on the doorstep, looking grave. Harold, the sheriff nodded. Miss Langley, afraid I've got some troubling news. There was an incident at the saloon last night. Robert Harris has filed charges against Yates Wilson for assault. Greta gasped. That's impossible. Mr. Wilson wouldn't. Several witnesses say otherwise, the sheriff cut in. According to them, Harris was having a drink when Wilson confronted him, accused him of insulting a lady's honor. Things got heated. Is Mr. Harris injured? Harold asked. Bloody nose, bruised pride, nothing serious, but he's pressing charges and with his connections. The sheriff shrugged. Wilson's being held until the circuit judge arrives next week. Greta's mind raced. After leaving her house, Robert must have gone to the saloon. Had Yates followed him there, confronted him about what he'd said to her? I need to speak with Mr. Wilson, she said firmly. Absolutely not, her father replied. You've been involved with this man enough already. Father, please. If this is about me somehow, of course it's about you, Harold snapped. The whole town knows he's been hanging around our porch for weeks. Now he's brawling in saloons over your honor. The scandal of it. After the sheriff left, Greta retreated to her room, mind whirling with plans. She had a small amount of money saved, not enough to go far, but perhaps enough to help Yates if he needed it. The thought of him sitting in a jail cell because of her was unbearable. That afternoon, while her father was meeting with mine investors, Greta slipped out of the house and made her way to the sheriff's office. Deputy Miller was manning the desk, looking half asleep. Miss Langley, he said, straightening up. Sheriff's not here. I've come to see Mr. Wilson. The deputy frowned. Don't think that's a good idea. Your father, my father, doesn't need to know. Please, just 5 minutes. After some hesitation, the deputy led her to the cells in the back. Yates sat on a narrow cot, hat beside him, staring at the wall. He looked up as they approached, surprise and something else, regret, perhaps crossing his face. Miss Langley, you shouldn't be here. 5 minutes, the deputy warned before retreating to give them some privacy. What happened? Greta asked, moving closer to the bars. Did you really attack Mr. Harris? Yates stood, approaching the bars but keeping a respectful distance. Not exactly. Found him at the saloon. Meant to have a word about the way he spoke to you. Things got heated. So you hit him. He said some things about you, things no man should say about a lady. Yates's jaw tightened. Lost my temper. Mr. Harris is pressing charges. The judge won't arrive for a week. Yates shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time I've seen the inside of a jail. The admission startled her. You've been arrested before. He held her gaze steadily. Once, Wyoming. Bar fight like this one. Man insulted a woman I knew. Is this a pattern for you? Defending women's honor, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. Only when the woman matters. The simple statement sent warmth spreading through her chest. Mr. Wilson Yates, I don't understand what's happening between us. These past weeks, you sitting on my porch. What does it mean? He was quiet for a long moment. When I first came to town, I saw you at the general store. You were laughing with the shopkeeper's daughter. Something about you reminded me of home, of better times. That night, I found myself walking past your house without meaning to. When I saw you on the porch, I don't know, couldn't make myself leave. And you kept coming back. Each night I told myself it would be the last. That it wasn't right, me sitting there without declaring intentions, but I kept coming anyway. What are your intentions? Greta asked softly. Before he could answer, Deputy Miller returned. Time's up, Miss Langley. Wait, Yates said quickly. There's something you should know. After the judge comes, I'm likely leaving Silvercreek. Leaving? The word felt like a physical blow. Why? Harris has influence. Even if the charges don't stick, word will spread. No ranch will hire a troublemaker. But that's not fair. You can't just leave. The deputy cleared his throat pointedly. Miss, really, unless there was a reason to stay, Yates said, his eyes never leaving hers. A compelling one. The deputy took her arm, gently but firmly leading her away. Greta glanced back once to see Yates standing at the bars, watching her go with an intensity that made her heart race. The walk home gave Greta time to think. For weeks, she had been curious about Yates, intrigued by his quiet presence on her porch. But now, faced with the possibility of him leaving, she realized her feelings ran deeper than curiosity. There was a connection between them, unspoken but undeniable. When she returned home, her father was waiting, furious. "Deputy Miller sent word you visited Wilson. Have you lost your mind?" "I needed to understand what happened." "What's to understand? He's a violent man with no prospects and no future here. You are forbidden from seeing him again." "I'm 22 years old, father. You cannot forbid me from anything." Harold's face reddened. "As long as you live under my roof, then perhaps I shouldn't," Greta interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "Live under your roof, that is." "And where would you go? What would you do?" Harold demanded. "You have no skills, no means of supporting yourself." "I could teach, as I mentioned, or work at the hotel. Mrs. Davis is always looking for help." "My daughter, a hotel maid," Harold laughed bitterly. "What would your mother say?" "She would say I deserve happiness, not just security." Harold's expression softened slightly. "Is that what you think?" "That I don't care about your happiness. Everything I've done mine, this house has been for you and your future." "I know that, father, but you cannot choose my path for me. This Cowboy Wilson, you think he can make you happy, a man who solves problems with his fists." "I don't know," Greta admitted, "but I'd like the chance to find out." For the next week, Greta divided her time between the house and town, discreetly inquiring about positions at the school and hotel. Both Mrs. Sullivan and Mrs. Davis expressed interest in hiring her, though both seemed concerned about angering Harold Langley, one of the town's most influential citizens. "Your father has been generous to the school," Mrs. Sullivan told her gently. "I'm not sure I can go against his wishes." "He doesn't need to know," Greta replied. "Not at first, anyway." Meanwhile, she visited Yates daily, ignoring her father's objections and the town gossip. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. She learned he had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, lost both parents young, raised his sister until her death, then drifted from job to job across the Western Territories. "Never stayed anywhere long," he told her. "Never felt right. And here, does it feel right?" His eyes held hers. "Parts of it do." The day the circuit judge arrived, Greta was waiting anxiously outside the makeshift courthouse, really just the town hall rearranged with a judge's bench. Robert Harris arrived with his father and two other businessmen, all looking confident. The proceedings were brief. Despite Robert's accusations, several witnesses testified that he had provoked Yates with insulting remarks about Greta. The judge, a practical man who had seen far worse offenses on his circuit, ordered Yates to pay a small fine for disturbing the peace and released him. Robert caught Greta's arm as she left the courthouse. "This isn't over. Your cowboy won't find work within 100 miles once word spreads." "Let go of me," she said firmly, pulling away. "You've made a fool of yourself over this man," Robert continued. "When he leaves, and he will leave, don't come looking for another chance with me." Greta found Yates outside, collecting his belongings from the sheriff. Her heart leapt at the sight of him in the sunlight, tall and proud despite the ordeal. "Congratulations," she said. "Though the fine seems unfair given the circumstances, small price to pay." He glanced around at the curious onlookers. "Could I walk you home?" They moved away from the crowd, walking slowly toward the edge of town. "Harris is right about one thing," Yates said after a while. "Work will be hard to find around here now." "So you're leaving?" Greta tried to keep her voice steady. "Murphy's already replaced me, got no reason to stay." He paused, looking at her. Unless, Yates stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I've been thinking. During those nights on your porch and this past week in that cell, about why I couldn't stay away from you, why, for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere." Greta's heart pounded. "And I believe I'm in love with you, Greta Langley." He said it simply, directly, in the same straightforward way he approached everything. "Never meant for it to happen. Never thought a woman like you would look twice at a man like me, but there it is." Joy surged through Greta, bright and overwhelming. "I believe I'm in love with you too, Yates Wilson." His eyes widened with surprise, then softened with hope. Even knowing I've got nothing to offer, no land, little money, no prospects here, we could go somewhere else, she suggested. Start fresh. You'd leave Silvercreek, your father. Everything you know, for the right reason. She stepped closer. For the right person. For the first time since she'd known him, Yates smiled, fully a transformation that took her breath away. He reached for her hand tentatively, as if still unsure of his welcome. There's a ranch for sale outside Laramie, he said. Nothing fancy, but good grazing land. Been saving for years, never knowing what for. Might be enough for a down payment. I have some savings too, not much, but I couldn't take your money, he interrupted. Wouldn't be right. It would if we were partners, in everything. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Are you proposing to me, Greta Langley? She laughed, feeling freer than she had in years. I suppose I am, though you haven't properly courted me yet, just sat on my porch night after night. Best courting I could think of, getting to know you, listening, being together without pretense. He squeezed her hand. But if you want proper courting, flowers, dinners, dancing, I can try. I think we're past that now. She grew serious. My father won't approve, I'll speak to him. Man to man, might not change his mind, but he deserves that respect. The confrontation with Harold went as poorly as Greta had feared. Her father raged, threatened to disown her, accused Yates of fortune hunting. Yates weathered the storm calmly, respectfully stating his intentions and his plan to provide for Greta. Not good enough, Harold declared, not nearly good enough for my daughter. That's for her to decide, Yates replied. I'm asking for your blessing, sir, not your permission. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with only Mrs. Sullivan and Sheriff Wells as witnesses. Harold refused to attend, remained locked in his study as Greta packed her belongings. He'll come around, she told Yates as they boarded the stagecoach that would take them to Laramie. Eventually. Hope you're right. He settled beside her, taking her hand. Sure about this, not too late to change your mind. In answer, she leaned over and kissed him, their third kiss since the wedding, each one less hesitant than the last. As the stagecoach pulled away from Silvercreek, Greta looked back at the town where she'd spent her entire life. She felt a moment of doubt, of fear at the unknown future ahead. Then Yates squeezed her hand, and the doubt vanished. 3 years later, Greta sat on the porch of their modest ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Inside, she could hear Yates singing softly to their 6-month-old daughter, Elizabeth. The ranch was thriving beyond their expectations. Yates had proven to have a gift not just for cattle but for horses as well. Their breeding program was beginning to earn a reputation throughout the territory. Harold had finally visited 6 months ago, just before Elizabeth's birth. The reunion had been awkward at first, but the sight of his daughter happy and prosperous had softened the old man's heart. He'd returned to Silvercreek with promises to visit his granddaughter regularly. Greta smiled as Yates emerged from the house, baby Elizabeth sleeping against his shoulder. Thought you might like some company, he said, settling beside her on the porch swing. Always, she replied, leaning against him. 3 years today, he murmured, since I first sat on your porch. Who would have thought where it would lead? He kissed the top of her head. I did, deep down. First moment I saw you, something in me knew. Is that why you kept coming back, night after night? That, and I liked watching you. The way you looked at the stars like they held answers. The way you hummed to yourself when you thought no one was listening. He shifted Elizabeth gently to his other shoulder. Fell in love with you bit by bit, just sitting there. Greta took his free hand, entwining their fingers. Every girl in town dreamed of marrying the handsome cowboy, she said with a smile, but he sat quietly on my porch every night. Luckiest man alive, Yates replied, looking out at the land they'd built together. Still am. As darkness settled over their ranch, they remained on the porch, the small family wrapped in contentment, the promise of their future stretching out before them like the endless Wyoming sky.